David Ignatius is here. He is a columnist and associate editor of the Washington Post. His award-winning column addresses topics such as global politics, the Middle East, and U.S. intelligence. He is also a writer of spy novels. He has written 6 of them, and the latest one is called Body of Lies. It is about a CIA effort to penetrate al-Qaeda. I am pleased to have David Ignatius at this table. Welcome.
Thank you, Charlie.
Now, what is it about you and all these novels, and all mainly about sort of spies?
I am fascinated by the spy business. Since I became a reporter 30 years ago, I've been writing about the subject. I wrote my first CIA piece in 1975, which sounds impossible, and I just stuck with it. I grew up in Washington. The CIA was the sort of permanent culture of Washington. If you threw a stone in the neighborhood where I lived in, chances were you'd hit a CIA case officer's home. And I became fascinated by it. In another lifetime, that might have been the kind of thing that I would have gravitated toward.
In other words, you might have come out of college and gone into
I graduated from college in 1973. All I wanted to do, in truth, from high school on, was be a journalist. Right. I have to say that in my career as a journalist, I've been struck over and over that what I do as a journalist, the way I try to pull secrets from people, pull information they're not sure they want public out and then turn it into journalism, is so similar to what CIA officers do overseas. I mean, sometimes I have a feeling I'm probably working the same people they're working and trying to get much the same information.
If you write spy novels, the gold standard, I assume, is Graham Greene and John le Carré.
Yep, those would be my 2 main men.
And what do you learn from them?
Well, Graham Greene teaches you that novels really are about character. That the characters in his books are unforgettable. Sometimes you forget the plot details; they almost don't matter. Graham Greene sees into the heart of his intelligence officers, the people that they recruit, the milieu that surrounds them. John le Carré, also has memorable characters. Most particularly George Smiley, who's all of our image of the intelligence chief. Sort of slightly overweight and harassed,
rumpled,
and also
smart,
and really smart, and knows a lot more than you think he knows. But his books also have this really powerful plot driving through the book. My favorite books of his, for me. I think Tinker Tailor. I love Spy Came In From the Cold is almost a perfect little set piece. About an agent on the run, about the case officer who just feels caught in a war he stopped believing in. It's a beautiful book. But Tinker Tailor is just such all our sense of what a mole is burrowing into an intelligence agency really comes from that novel. Even for CIA officers, they never used to talk about moles. They do now because they learned it from le Carré's writings.
Well, they found moles, haven't they?
They have found moles. The CIA has been penetrated, as they say, we now realize, by a series of moles who did enormous damage.
Let's understand that when we say moles, what we mean, because the classic story is somebody that's buried there, and then later comes to deliver the fruit. There's also the cases of the Americans, it seems to me to be, Ames being this perfect example, of people that have simply been bought. Am I right or wrong?
Ames was bought. These are the motivations of these people are so complicated, so hard to understand. They need something they're not getting in their careers. Is it money? Is it esteem? The KGB, like the CIA, is very good at appealing to people. CIA officers have psychiatrists who advise them, and there's something a little bit like Gail Sheehy's Passages, that they go after people in the vulnerable late 40s when nothing in life's quite working out the way they hoped, and they didn't get promoted to colonel, and they didn't get as much money as they wanted. And often the CIA would give these KGB recruits medals. They'd have medals created, and they'd award them and sort of give them the love that they weren't getting from their own service.
Yeah. You knew James Angleton.
I did.
He believed there was a mole deep inside.
He was obsessed with the idea that not only was there a mole inside the CIA, but that all of the CIA's operations against the Soviet Union were poisoned by what people came to describe as the monster plot You know, there was this idea that the Soviets were 10 feet tall. That was the expression that people out there used.
And they were smart.
Well, they are smart. They're good at running a spy service. I met Angleton after he had retired. I was a young journalist in my late 20s, and I just picked up the phone one day. That was back when you could, call directory assistants, ask for James J. Angleton, and get his number, and he answered the phone, and I said, "This is David Ignatius from the Wall Street Journal, where I worked then." And we went to lunch, and had a series of lunches. He was an absolutely fascinating and bizarre character.
And brilliant.
He was brilliant. By the time that I met him, I think he did have a deep paranoia about what was happening to the CIA, the way in which it was being contorted. I think the time I met him, those were not his best years. I mean, we would sit in his club and he would sip very tall, fruity cocktails through a long straw. And he'd smoke Virginia Slim cigarettes in a very odd way. We were talking before about he was an amateur gemologist in addition to all of his other odd traits. And so he would go from his club in downtown Washington to his favorite jeweler, and he'd get out his little jeweler's eyepiece and he'd look at the stones and comment on them. He was
Did he know E. Cummings or not? He knew some.
Yes, he knew Ezra Pound.
Ezra Pound, that's who he
knew.
knew.
Ezra Pound. There was a theory when the CIA really was looking hard for the mole that Angleton believed was there. They began to think, well, who fits the classic British profile, the intellectual, the kind of person who was rebellious in the 1930s at university and had eccentric friends. And then all of a sudden, oh my God, it's Jim Angleton. And there was, in fact, a case made by another counterintelligence officer that Jim Angleton was the Soviet mole. I was told it was on reels of tape that were held in secret in the CIA director's office. And I wrote that story in the Wall Street Journal at the time that I was still seeing Angleton, and he was so furious. He never talked to me.
And the most famous Soviet spy in the United Kingdom, obviously, was Kim Philby.
Yes.
Turned out to be a mole.
Kim Philby, who was Angleton's pal.
And friend, And Angleton tried to say in the beginning that he couldn't possibly, because and it turned out that he was a source almost for Philby, because they'd have all these conversations and they trusted each other.
There's a view that Philby's betrayal and Angleton's failure to see it and understand it really drove him into this deep suspicion bordering on paranoia that everything was poisoned.
Since he didn't see that, it must be deeper.
He had been so tricked by Philby.
Yeah, I just want to leave him, but the notion about him also among other agents, and Colby, I guess, was the guy who finally said goodbye, because he was the director of the CIA. The story is that he ruined the careers because of obsession of some very good CIA people.
I've met people who were under suspicion for so long, suspected of being moles, being in contact with the Soviets. It wasn't just that he ruined careers. He largely stopped offensive CIA operations against the Soviets. They were so worried that everything they touched was contaminated that they stopped touching things. They were very, very cautious.
It is a prime grant. It has always been for people to write. Tell me about this book. Here is Roger Ferris.
Roger Ferris is the hero of this novel. This novel is set in a time that is eerily like now. The book is framed around what my CIA sources called bleed out, in which the terrorists of Iraq begin to move out into Europe, coming toward America. The car bombers stop killing Muslims in Baghdad. They start killing people in Milan and London and Rotterdam and a whole string of cities.
And finally New York.
I
don't mean your book, but I mean...
Roger Ferris, the hero of this novel, who served in Iraq himself, has gotten shot in the leg and has got not a chip on his shoulder, but shrapnel in his leg from the war gone bad in Iraq, is given this target, and he is told to try to penetrate this terrorist organization, much as our CIA officers are told that today. And he realizes in the course of this book that it's impossible. It is too close, too difficult a target. But he also realizes that he could have much the same effect if he tricked al-Qaeda into thinking that they had been penetrated, that we were inside their tent. So the book opens with a classic tale from British intelligence in which the British, took a dead body and dressed up the body as if he was and let him float ashore onto the Spanish coast, carrying what seemed to be messages to other British commanders about an Allied landing in Greece in 1943. Everybody was expecting it to come through Sicily and up in Italy, and this said, no, it's further east. And the Germans got the documents and believed them. They were deceived by this. So the body of lies of this title is a reference to how the book opens. Dressing a corpse that will be put in a place that Al-Qaeda operatives will find it, and the body is carrying messages to our agent in the heart of Al-Qaeda.
You seem to me, as a reporter, fascinated clearly by the CIA, but also a lot by the Middle East side of this. How much do you know about Jordanian intelligence? Let's take the real Jordanian intelligence, not the intelligence you write about, in terms of its effectiveness, in terms of how well it is wired and how good it is, say, compared to other Middle Eastern intelligences, including the Mossad.
I do a lot of research for all 6 of my novels, and I did quite a lot for this. And I spent a lot of time with senior officers in the Jordanian intelligence service, with the blessing of top political officials there, really trying to understand how they operate. They are a very good service. And part of why they're so good is that they have the patience to work cases over the long term. Their penetrations of Al-Qaeda probably have been the most effective of any intelligence service. You can't compare them to the Israelis or anybody else. Right. But you do have to say they're awfully good at what they do. I mean, they're good at using deception to take down their adversaries. That's another theme of this book. But there's a famous bit of intelligence history in which the Jordanian service, with help from the United States and Britain, went after the Abu Nidal organization, which was the most terrifying terrorist group of its time, and spread disinformation, rumors. People's bank accounts would suddenly be empty. Rumors about their girlfriends being stolen away by other operatives would be spread, and these guys basically ended up destroying each other. They took their own organization down because of the deception and the rumors that were introduced really cleverly by the Jordanians with help. And
Abu Nidal finally died in Damascus, or
Abu Nidal. I don't remember where he died. I think he might have died in Baghdad, but
right.
he did die, and his organization had self-destructed. But what was not known at that time, what was a great and powerful secret, was that this was as a result of deception, disinformation, cleverly used by the Jordanians.
So your second central character is a Jordanian intelligence officer.
The character who, for me, I have to be honest, sort of steals the book is named Hani Salam. He's the chief of the Jordanian General Intelligence Department, which is their spy service. He's a very urbane man. He's very well dressed. He's very elegant. He is a man, as is often the case in that part of the world, who knows much more than he says. And the book, in a sense, is an unfolding of how much he knows and how little we know about that battlefield. I mean, if there's one thing that I keep learning over and over again covering the Middle East, it's that the United States just doesn't know enough about that part of the world. We don't know enough to undertake the very ambitious, transforming efforts that we've made. Iraq's the most obvious example, but there are many of them. It's a part of the world we think we understand, but we don't, and that's really the message that this character, Hani, offers to his American counterparts.
Let me go from the book to real life now. Is the CIA today, in your judgment, simply not where it ought to be in understanding the Middle East, having operatives in place, having the right relationships, and having the ability to make a difference?
The CIA, still has some marvelous officers, although a whole generation of top CIA people really got purged in a crazy period when the Bush administration put a Republican Congressman, Porter Goss, in as head of the agency, and he basically began getting rid of people who were suspected of disloyalty. It was a very
But some of those people have come back.
Yes, one in particular is now the number 2 man, Stephen Kappas, who is widely respected. I think that I think about my business of journalism and how people in the news business learn things. They learn things by taking risks. They learn things often by making mistakes. That spirit of experimentation, of risk-taking, really has been squeezed out of the agency, in part by the way that they get pounded in public, the way they get pounded by the news media. They have an awful lot of lawyers looking over their shoulders. They really hate the sense that they're a political football manipulated by the executive branch, but the Bush administration pushing for the intelligence it wants, pushed by Congress. So I think it's a tough business to be in. We're not very good to our spies, if you will. The simplest way to put it is, the United States has the intelligence service it deserves. We have not taken this seriously. We have not really worked to protect it. We have not given these people. We do things to the CIA we'd never think of doing to the military.
Like what?
Well, military officers are treated with respect. You don't put down the guys who are out serving in the field. You try not to second guess them. You try to stick with them, and you understand how difficult their work is. That attitude, it just isn't extended typically to intelligence officers who are constantly described often as buffoons or half criminals. It's just, I think other countries, we're going to come to this. We are going to understand how important it is to have good intelligence, and we will end up, I think, making improvements and having a higher quality intelligence service than we have now. You hope that process is beginning, but Charlie, I honestly think right now, no. I think there's a long, long way to go.
What do you think about this release of this sort of report of the family jewels?
I think it was an effort by the current CIA director, Michael Hayden, an Air Force general, to try to identify...
Former head of NSA.
The former head of NSA, to try to say to the public, we want to be open. I think Hayden understands that when you have an executive branch as unpopular as the Bush administration is, the CIA needs to have broader public support. So, he's saying, we're going to try to be open. Here are our family jewels. Here's our biggest secrets. We're going to put them out because we know we need to be accountable.
But would they put out secrets that they thought were really damaging to them?
Well, I've been through the 700 pages, and I'll tell you there are an awful lot of blank pages. There are a lot of jewels that are still in the safe, as it were. Another example, it's sort of comical maybe, but they have a new person to do liaison with people like you, with Hollywood studios, with people who make TV shows. There's an understanding that, in the end, public support is going to come from people understanding better what they do, who they are. The nicest thing that anybody ever said to me about my books, a couple of CIA officers have said,
yeah, exactly.
that when I had to tell my family what I do for a living, I gave them a copy of my first novel.
This is George Tenet, former director of the CIA, came to the CIA from the U.S. Senate, where he'd been counsel to the Senate Intelligence Committee. David Ignatius has done it again, like his seminal spy novel, Agents of Innocence. Some people think that's the best book. The first book is the best book.
Some people say that they should read this one.
Body of Lies is fiction, but reads like fact. CIA officers admire Ignatius because more than any other writer, he understands the nuances of their trade. Fascinating. What is it, the nuances you think he's talking about? Give me an example of that.
I think what intelligence officers really do is like what reporters really do. A lot of it is waiting. A lot of it is just waiting to get people to talk, standing outside of rooms. What we read about in the typical spy novel or see in a spy movie, there's a lot of slam bang and people shooting and running around. It's not like that. It's really about human beings. It's about getting people's trust, and then you could say, and then picking their pockets, but getting their trust, right. And then getting them to deliver. And that's what we do in our business.
How long has it been since the last novel?
Oh, boy.
8 years?
It was 7 years.
No, what took you so long?
I was living in Paris.
Sorry to hear that. I've heard it's a nice place.
I was executive editor of the International Herald Tribune, right. And I said to myself, David, even you are not so stupid that you're going to waste your weekends writing a book. So I just knocked off.
Yeah. So you just didn't focus on it until you came back here?
I came back. I had a.
The Washington Post no longer owned the International Herald Tribune.
Well, unfortunately, the hostile takeover by the New York Times.
Right.
But I was spending a lot of time in the Middle East again. I was in and out of Iraq all the time. And the idea for this book, the idea that we could take this adversary, Al-Qaeda, and try to deceive it, play games with it at a very deep level, and then what might happen, how that might blow up in ways that we couldn't predict. That began to interest me, and then I got started on the book.
I close with this. First of all, the Middle East is the most interesting place for mystery and intrigue and all of that than any place in the world, don't you think?
I do. It has hopelessly infected me.
Me too. And you overlay the CIA and intelligence agencies and this sort of cloak and dagger stuff, it becomes twice as interesting. What do you make of today's reports about Al-Qaeda in Pakistan and almost what some people are saying, it's almost back to levels it was some time ago?
I found the national intelligence estimate that you're referring to that was just released this week chilling. I think when I talk to CIA officers, they say what's worrisome is that Al-Qaeda is again able to recruit in these frontier areas of Pakistan. The core of Al-Qaeda is again able to get the operatives, the spokes that will project out, into our world and do terrible damage. So I found it chilling, not least because it has seemed almost impossible for the government of President Musharraf to go after the Al-Qaeda operatives in these areas. These are not governed spaces.
This book is called Body of Lives. It is a novel by David Ignatius. One thing you can say about David, he knows what he writes about. Body of Lies.
That was great. Thank you, Charlie. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.